There are times that a sequel is announced to the mere puzzlement of just about everyone who hears about it. We're talking about movies that were either commercial flops, released decades ago, or simply have no obvious path for a sequel to be made. And yet, Hollywood's doing it anyway. I'm Ellie for What Culture, and these are 10 upcoming movie sequels nobody expected. Number 10, Blue Streak 2. Let's be real here, when was the last time you thought about Blue Streak? The Martin Lawrence starring buddy cop joint was a box office hit back in 1999, yet despite Sony's attempts to get a sequel going shortly thereafter, it never materialized. That is until now. Back in October, more than 25 years after the original film was released, Sony announced that they were re-teaming with Lawrence on Blue Streak 2. This was almost certainly motivated by the box office success of the last two Bad Boys films, which grossed over $800 million combined, suggesting that there was still some big screen life left in the genre yet. Even so, there's not nearly the same nostalgia or reverence for Blue Streak as there was for Bad Boys. And the success of the third and fourth Bad Boys films can mostly be credited to the chemistry between Lawrence and Will Smith. A Blue Streak sequel obviously won't have that. And will audiences really be clamoring to potentially see Lawrence and original co-star Luke Wilson hanging out again? If Wilson is even invited back, who knows? The time for a Blue Streak sequel was 2001 or 2003, not more than a quarter century after it was hot box office property. Number 9, Gladiator 3. Gladiator 2 may be only just hitting cinemas to broadly positive reviews, but in the lead up to the epic sequel's release, director Ridley Scott was already busily talking up an in-development threequel, because why the hell not? Back in September, Scott confirmed that Gladiator 3 was already in the works, and recently told Total Film that he even had 8 pages of the script written, calling it, quote, the beginning of a very good footprint. The filmmaker's industrious work ethic is undeniable, as well as his tendency to get projects greenlit, shot, and released in a speedy time frame. And so, while he's next set to tackle a biopic of pop group The Bee Gees, it sounds like he's keen to get Gladiator 3 before cameras thereafter. Considering that Scott has directed 8 movies over the last decade, don't be shocked if Gladiator 3 is released in just a short few years, assuming the second film delivers the expected results at the box office, of course. Number 8, Orphan 3. 2009's horror film Orphan may have been a sturdy box office hit, but given the movie's outcome, there didn't seem to be any realistic room for a sequel. But in 2022, prequel Orphan First Kill was released with lead actress Isabelle Fuhrman inexplicably reprising the role of serial killer Esther, aka Lena, a 30-something woman with a hormone disorder that makes her appear childlike. Camera tricks, makeup effects, and body doubles were used to make the now mid-20s Fuhrman still resemble a young girl. And while the movie had some impressive surprises up its sleeve, it was undeniably stretching credibility to near snapping point. And so, what a shock it was then, when late last year it was confirmed that Orphan 3 was happening, with Fuhrman once again reprising the role. Now, while it's fair to assume that the third film will be an interquel set between the first and second movies, each passing year will only make it tougher to accept Fuhrman in the central role. The time for striking while the iron is hot is long gone with this franchise, so the filmmakers will have to hope that audiences will simply embrace the absurdity of a late 20s Fuhrman playing a character supposed to look like a child. Number 7, Ice Age 6. There are only 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and the Ice Age franchise enduring until the heat death of the universe. The 5th and to date final theatrical Ice Age film, Ice Age Collision Course, was released way back in 2016. Where its disappointing box office performance, grossing less than half of the 4th movie, Continental Drift, seemed to put its big screen aspirations to bed. Though short-form Ice Age content continued to be produced, the final nail in the IP's coffin seemed to be the closure of production company Blue Sky Studios in 2021, shortly after being acquired by Disney. A critically panned spin-off, The Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild, was released direct to Disney Plus in 2022, without Blue Sky's involvement or most of the main cast involved. But just when it seemed like Ice Age had finally gone kaput, Disney recently confirmed that Ice Age 6 was now in production for a theatrical release. with original voice actors Ray Romano, John Leguizamo, Dennis Leary, Simon Pegg, and Queen Latifah all set to return. It'll certainly be interesting to see if Disney can reverse the box office fortunes of a franchise that just seems to have run its course. Namely, will family audiences be persuaded to part with their money for a trip to the cinema, or just wait for it to hit Disney+? Number 6, I Know What You Did Last Summer sequel. Though 1997 slasher film I Know What You Did Last Summer was a massive box office success, the fact that its hastily released follow-up I Still Know What You Did Last Summer flopped commercially seemed to indicate general audience disinterest in an ongoing franchise. This was compounded by a third film in the series, I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer, being dumped direct to DVD without any original cast members in 2006 to non-existent fanfare. But Hollywood loves to dredge up dead or dormant horror franchises for another go-around. And while it was announced way back in 2014 that Mike Flanagan was working on a reboot of I Know What You Did Last Summer, this was ultimately scrapped in favor of a legacy sequel. In February 2023, a direct follow-up to the second film was announced with original stars Jennifer Love Hewitt and Freddie Prinze Jr. in talks to return. The filmmakers will reportedly be taking an approach similar to 2022's fifth Scream film, by teaming the legacy characters with a new cast of younger heroes/victims. While there's certainly still plenty of nostalgia for the original film in the horror fandom, nothing we've seen from the IP since then suggests that it has the legs for an enduring slasher series. But as ever, time will tell. Number 5, Spaceballs 2. Mel Brooks' unforgettable sci-fi parody Spaceballs even included a gag about a possible sequel entitled Spaceballs 2: The Search for More Money. But as the decades pass following its 1987 release and Brooks' filmmaking career beginning to take a back seat, most fans seem to give up hope. But this past June, Spaceballs 2 was formally confirmed to be in development, with Josh Gad set to star and produce alongside a currently 98-year-old Brooks, while Josh Greenbaum will handle directing duties. Naturally, there's plenty of skepticism about a 4 decades later Spaceballs sequel, especially given the likelihood that Brooks' involvement will be minimal at best, and the most recent sequel to one of his beloved comedies, TV series History of the World Part 2, wasn't great, to be kind. This is absolutely a film that should have happened in the late 90s at the latest, but the fact that it's actually going to happen at all is nothing short of astonishing. Number 4, The Instigators 2. Doug Liman's heist comedy The Instigators came and went this past summer in the blink of an eye. The Matt Damon and Casey Affleck starring romp scoring wildly mixed reviews from critics and swiftly evaporating into the void as the card-carrying piece of streaming content it undeniably was. And yet, it's ended up quietly being one of 2024's biggest streaming hits to date, topping digital charts during its week of release and reportedly becoming one of Apple TV's most watched films ever. A tie-in Dunkin's Donut commercial featuring Damon and Affleck went viral around the movie's release, which may have helped move the needle somewhat. Either way, Apple is reportedly ecstatic with the film's streaming figures, and currently developing a sequel with the two actors expected to return. That's quite the outcome for one of the year's most aggressively mediocre genre films that had no presence in the discourse whatsoever, no matter the talent in front of and behind the camera. But as ever, the streaming numbers don't lie. Number 3, Spinal Tap 2. This Is Spinal Tap is a mockumentary masterpiece and one of the most iconic comedies of all time, but also a perfect time capsule of a film whose charms and influence seem impossible to replicate. But director Rob Reiner is going to give it a college try anyway, as he announced in 2022 that Spinal Tap 2 was indeed happening, with Reiner and other original cast members Christopher Guest, Michael McKean, and Harry Shearer reprising their roles. Though many doubted whether the sequel would ever actually get made, it was indeed shot earlier this year, with the likes of Elton John, Paul McCartney, Garth Brooks, and Questlove reportedly having cameo appearances. As of the last update, Reiner said the film was on track for a mid-2025 release. But of course, it remains to be seen whether Spinal Tap 2 can recapture the magic or end up yet another belated sequel that feels woefully desperate or even sad. Fingers crossed for the former though. Number 2, Lords of War. Andrew Niccol's anti-war crime drama Lord of War may have been broadly well received by critics in 2005, but it was a considerable box office flop, which combined with the utter lack of an obvious angle for a sequel seemed to leave it an understandable one-off. But in 2023, a sequel titled Lords of War was announced, with Nicolas Cage set to reprise his role of protagonist Yuri Orlov, while Bill Skarsgård will play his son. It's certainly an intriguing hook, but while Cage is undeniably enjoying a major career resurgence as of late, that hasn't translated into dynamite box office, suggesting that the commercial prospects of a splashy Lord of War sequel are dim at best. On top of that, Nichols' post-Lord of War filmography is littered with critical and/or commercial letdowns. All the same, of all the mid-2000s movies to get a legacy sequel, who had this modestly appreciated piece of work on their bingo card? Not me. Number 1, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert 2. The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert remains a hugely popular movie some 3 decades after its release. But it also seemed like a beautifully executed one-off that didn't really need or beg for a follow-up. However, last April saw original director Stephen Elliott announce that a sequel was indeed happening, with the original trio of stars, Terence Stamp, Hugo Weaving, and Guy Pearce, all set to return. Even accepting that the world is a very different place 30 years after the original's release, and exploring how the LGBTQ+ community has evolved certainly does have merit, there are surely many fans who would simply prefer to leave the story on the first film's euphoric ending. And with Stamp being 86 years old at the time of press, it would certainly make sense to get the film shooting sooner rather than later, even if recapturing the magic of the beloved original will be quite the tall order indeed.